Hello, good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Healthcare Differently IG Live. I am just waiting on Dr. Marcia Anderson to join us, but yeah, I'm really excited. So thank you, folks, for joining. Please come in. Welcome, welcome, welcome. We are about to start, and I'm really excited for Dr. Anderson to join us because she is. Has been a friend, a confidant, a what we call an anti-oppression world co-conspirator as we collaborated together to address, the colonial spaces that we live in. And so, yeah, just really excited um, to have her. There we go.
Okay, thank you.
We did it.
We did it. Thank you for having me on my first Instagram Live.
Yes, welcome to your very first one. I am very honored that you are doing this with me for the first time. And yeah, welcome everyone. People are tuning in.
Mhm.
So I am joining you from my home, and Dr. Anderson is joining you from her car after a long day.
It happens,
But there's
right?
it's a nice sunroof behind you actually. So it's a vibe. It's a vibe.
Okay, thank you. I have to admit, since we talked before, I shifted my car so that the sun was in a better location for my lighting. Yeah.
I appreciate that. I appreciate you. Well, we are enjoying it. I know you did it for your lighting, but we are enjoying the view. Okay, so we're about to
Mhm.
start. I'm going to do the standard intro that I need to do, and then I will introduce you, and then we're going to get into it tonight. Okay?
Uh-huh.
Uh, Welcome everybody to Health Caring Differently. Our Instagram lives happen like this every Tuesday, although these are the last set for the spring. So I'm glad you're
Mm.
tuning in, and then we're taking a break. Rest is resistance, need to take a break. So we've got all of April, and then we'll resume in the fall, but we'll have other fun content for you. But the Instagram lives, these are the last few for April, but we'll continue to give you information on community of support and different pathway programs, summer jobs, and
Mhm.
different opportunities across the country through our newsletter. So certainly go to healthcaringdifferently.com to join the newsletter, and you'll continue to get that information throughout the summer, as well as scholarship and research opportunities. We're about that. We want to just, the aunties are here. We're going to provide those resources to you. All right. So, who am I bringing to the table this evening, right? To dish out some information and inspiration. My guest is Dr. Marcia Anderson. So Dr. Anderson is a Cree-Anishinaabe with roots in Peguis First Nation and Norway House Cree Nation in Manitoba. She practices internal medicine and serves as the Vice-Dean Indigenous Health, Social Justice, and Anti-Racism. I wish you could have the pew, 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 pew.
I like to say just Vice-Dean of all the things.
Right?
Yeah.
Right? In the Rady Faculty of Health Sciences, all of the things. At the University of Manitoba, Dr. Anderson was the inaugural chair of the National Consortium for Indigenous Medical Education and remains on the executive committee. And she's made extensive contributions
Mm.
to public health, which I always appreciate as a public health specialist, to public health, actively working towards a decolonizing
Mhm.
public health practice approach. Fire.
Mhm.
Welcome, Dr. Anderson.
Oh, thanks so much for having me.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So, I appreciate you because I know you've had a long day and, just taking on a lot. We could talk about it if you want, or we could, you know what I mean? Just focus on be in the moment.
Sure.
But yeah, it's been a day, so I appreciate you being here. Now, health caring differently is about approaching
Mhm.
our work
Mhm.
as health professionals in a different way because we are different. We come from a different
Yeah.
lens. I feel like I don't need to ask you how are you health caring differently. It's pretty obvious from your bio. You're doing it. You're doing all of the things.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna jump in more and ask you, because I think it's important. I want our young listeners to
Mhm.
understand your why. Why did you decide to become a
Mhm.
doctor, and why did you decide to practice this way?
Yeah, great question. So, I have been really fortunate in knowing I wanted to be a doctor since I was a very young age. But I didn't really understand why until I was in medical school and we had some experiences, me directly, as well as my father, of really significant racism in healthcare. And I thought, you know
Mm-hmm.
what? I can do something about this. My relatives and my community members deserve high quality, excellent healthcare that is free of racism. I have a voice and I can nurture a voice that can make a powerful difference. So let's go. Let's see what this can be. And that those experiences of racism really informed my why in shaping how I practice and the different roles that I've had.
I think that's amazing. Like, my path has been like, I experienced racism at a young age, but I didn't experience it in the healthcare system, right?
Mhm.
Like, I experienced it elsewhere, and then
Mhm.
medicine came much, 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 much later. But I think it's very powerful, because I think for some people, they experience, like, medicine is a situation where people are so vulnerable, and where people experience, adversity or violence, really. Let me not call it
Mhm.
adversity, because that sounds pretty. Violence in healthcare,
Mhm.
in the treatment and neglect and all of the stereotypes and all of
Mhm.
that, it makes them sometimes want to stay away from healthcare, like avoid it. And you
Yes.
felt like your coping mechanism was to rise to the challenge and say you're going to change it, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's a beautiful thing. And I think many of us who healthcare differently have like different but somewhat of that like coping mechanism. Like, I'm going to be an agent of change. Would
Mhm.
you say?
Mhm. Absolutely. And um, naming ceremonies are really important in the communities and the traditions that I come
Mm-hmm.
from. My Dakota name, which was the second name that I was given, refers to the buffalo. And if I could just share for a minute, because I think it's so germane to this idea of health caring differently, two teachings of the buffalo. One is the buffalo draws its energy from facing straight into the worst of the storm, right? Not
Mm-hmm.
running away from it. But also, buffalo, when there is a threat, the healthy, the strong buffalo will make a circle to protect the ones who are weaker or younger or perhaps elderly and sick from the threat. But
Mm-hmm.
also, speaking back to that rest as resistance piece, I don't do any of my work alone. I do my work in circles of teams, of people, so that I also have my time to step into the circle and be protected to rest. And to me,
Mm.
those teachings are so core to how I do this work of healthcare differently.
I love that. And while you were saying that, we were seeing some hearts. I saw like Matt joined. That's my gem. But the few people were sending hearts, right? Just to send that
Mm-hmm.
love. And I think it's interesting because my tribe doesn't have naming ceremony, but like on my partner side, my children's side, they do. So my children had a
Mm-hmm.
naming ceremony, and it's interesting how like across, you know what I mean, cultures, we find these like common points.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think because it helps guide us. Like, my name has meaning. It's God's gift. But I think when we're given
Mm-hmm.
these names, when we're so fortunate to be able to hold on to our original, pre-colonial
Mm-hmm.
cultures and names, it helps to give us strength. And like you said, you have the village around you. You have that you
Yes.
don't do it alone, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's so powerful. I love that. So you grew up kind of knowing like you had that within you, basically.
I grew up knowing I was going to be a doctor. One of my personal responses to the experiences of racism that I had in medical school was to reconnect to my cultural
Mm,
identity and to
mm,
ceremonial communities. I didn't grow up with
okay.
that. We were raised pretty disconnected from that. And so, really drawing on that reconnection, that reclamation work, which all of us who have experienced the harms of colonization and racism need to do. Who am I? Like, who do I know myself to be? Not those external
Yes.
messages. Who am I in the context of the strength and beauty of my community? And how does that inform my practice of medicine? And I just like, as you were talking too, and even the name, Health Caring Differently, I think about that Audre Lorde quote about being forged in the crucibles of difference, right? Like
Yes.
forged, strength is in that difference that we bring to our practice.
That's it. And that's why for those of you as listeners, that's what I want you to feel, that difference. Like you are different, but there's beauty in that. And you want to actually
Absolutely.
bring that into healthcare, not only because it's
Mhm.
wonderful, but because healthcare needs it right
Yes,
now, has always needed
absolutely.
it, but really needs it. And it's a beautiful thing. But at the same time that it's a beautiful thing, it comes with its challenges.
Mhm,
And I'm wondering for you, like if you think back to your pre-medical journey,
mhm,
and even in medical school, like you mentioned the racism that made you want to reconnect, right? There's this sense when we enter these spaces, you're given a label and you're like, that is not who I am. And so you
mhm,
do end up pushing back, but then have to ask yourself the question, well, then who am I if I'm not what the
mhm,
label is that's been put on me?
mhm.
But there are things that happen to make you go through that process. So if we can kind of rewind a little
We
bit
want
before you
in
went
the
through
process a little bit.
reclamation, like
Yeah.
what were some of the challenges and how did you overcome them before coming to like the reclamation point?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. And the first thing that I would say was I was the first person in my family to go to university at all, much less to
Mm,
go on and get 3 university degrees. And this is like back in the day. I graduated high school in 1995. There was no internet. It was flipping through the pages of the academic calendar, trying to calculate back from medical school requirements to what I had to apply for university. I grew up in the
mm-hmm,
north end of Winnipeg. Indigenous peoples are clustered in the lowest income quintiles. That was my family's experience. I had to figure out student loans. I had to figure out scholarship and bursary applications to fund my way through. I had to work part time and still study and get a good grade on the highly competitive medical college admissions test. Like there were all of those things that I had to do, and I was not aware of supports that actually were available at the time too.
mm-hmm.
Maybe not the extent of supports right now, but there actually was a health careers access program. I just didn't know about it at the time. And so I really commend the work that you're doing here to make sure that people of any age who are thinking maybe I have something to give to the healthcare system have access to the information of yes, these barriers are real. They continue to be real. And there are supports available to help you maybe remove some of those barriers,
Yes.
give you a boost over some of those barriers.
Thank you. Yes, and that's it. It's been a beautiful thing. Like it's funny. I contacted a lot of colleagues and friends like yourself, thinking like 50% would say yes because a lot of folks aren't on Instagram. Like you're saying, this is your first Instagram live, so I figured like
Yeah,
half the people would say yes, and then pretty much everybody said yes.
we're
So then I
all
was like, whoops.
into it.
So we're booked for the whole year basically
Yeah.
now, which is a wonderful wonder, you know what I
Mhm.
mean? So we're booked into the fall. But that's it. It's those experiences and challenges and just having that grit, I guess, to move towards it. And then yeah, so now let's dive a little bit more into the reclamation piece, right? Like we
Mhm.
come into these spaces, people make assumptions,
Yeah.
and then you know what so it's obviously um every group is going to be different and
Yeah.
your and also time, but you know what I mean, like what
Mhm.
you observed. So I can say like for me as a black person, the assumptions about us that come from slavery and colonization is that we're less intelligent,
Mhm.
subhuman, quite different, not capable, right? And
Mhm.
so there's this need to kind of perform all the time to, you know what I mean,
Yeah.
to keep
Yeah.
disproving the stereotypes. But the problem is, you can only sprint, you can only run so long before you run yourself ragged, trying to
Mhm.
compete with these stereotypes. And so
Mhm.
that's where you have to kind of reclaim. So my process, obviously, there's going to be similarities, but yours is going to be very different than mine. So
Yeah.
can you speak to that specifically,
Oh,
right? Your
sure.
specific.
Sure. I think you learned some of this at an earlier career stage than I did. So kudos to you, right? I think
Thank
that, we can't underestimate, and I wish I understood sooner how experiences of racism really drive perfectionism. Like, honestly, if that is one of the takeaways viewers take from this, understand racism drives perfectionism because we learn it as a strategy to demonstrate our worthiness to belong in a space. It is manufactured. It is hustling for worthiness when actually we've already demonstrated the qualifications to be there, right? And so I had people say to me in medical school, like, is this harder for you since you got in the easy way? And I'd be like, do you want to compare MCAT scores? You know what I mean? Uh,
Right?
like, could you check your assumptions at the door a little bit around it? But it was also how we were taught about Indigenous health and some of that biologic determinism of race. Like, clearly, Indigenous people have inferior genes. That's why your rates of diabetes are so high. Nothing around colonization or malnutrition or medical experimentation in residential schools or the like entrenchment of poverty by design in Indigenous communities. That was all stuff I had to learn later. But what I held on to, and in part I give a lot of credit to my family because I knew I was loved and I knew my family was proud of me. And that helped me resist the messages of my inferiority in the medical school. So I was like, something else has to be true here, right? Something else has to be true. This school is not going to teach it for me. So I need to look at that. That's where I connected with other Indigenous docs and medical students. I've had now friends for 20 plus years who are now also currently practicing Indigenous docs. We laughed together. We taught ourselves together. It really enforced to me the most important lesson for this work is you have to build community and you have to be in community to do it. And you cannot do reclamation work, at least in my experience, I could not do reclamation work outside of the rebuilding of my own community connections.
I love that. There's so many things I want to
Mhm.
unpack in that. But first thing is I want to like take away the claim that I realized the perfectionism issue before you. I don't think so. What I learned at a young age is a bit of like the deflection piece, which
Okay.
I talked about when I did IG Live last time. So when I experienced racism, it would be like, it's not me. Like something's wrong with you. It's a very Nigerian thing. Like something's wrong with you, right? Like that's
Yeah.
how we move through the world. Like deflect, right?
Okay.
But the excellence thing of like, you know what I mean, like
Mhm.
working like 10 times as hard and you always need to have an A plus, that's also a Nigerian and colonization thing. Maybe predates colonization, I don't know, but certainly the perfection thing was very
Mhm.
much there, and I had to like unlearn that with time. And the way
Mhm.
I've done that actually has been through public health and using kind of like continuous quality improvement. Like, okay, I'll put something
Mhm.
out into the world. If it's not perfect, it's okay.
Yeah.
I'll grow and,
Still be valuable. Yeah.
exactly. Yeah, and I'll get feedback and I'll grow. But the other thing about community, and we can talk about that, like we wherever in the what is it, time series of, in your life you want to touch on, like now versus then. I'm curious about your
Mhm.
experiences in bringing in, because you're talking about, so when you do the reclamation work, there's also a bit of a crisis that can happen because there's such a contrast between when you want to bring in traditional ways sometimes, and
Mhm.
there's the tension of colonial ways, right? Like
Mhm.
I'll give a couple of examples because I went more deep into this when I had just finished residency and I went to work at Taibu Community Health Center. I wanted to
Okay.
do
Yeah.
research in community, Black community research, but it's like you have to take the time to gain trust. It doesn't work at
Mhm.
the same time as some of the grants. There are some things that the community didn't want published. And
Yeah.
then when we went for publication, they're like, where's this data? And I'm like, we're not, me and Dr. Aisha
Yes.
Lofters were like, we're not giving it to you because we promised the
Yeah.
community that it would stay safe with the
Mhm.
community. It's none of your business. Like we gave you 3 lines on it and that's what we're sharing. The other thing that I realized is even when we did really good community work and we finally got a little piece of grant, the media, even though it would be a whole team, the Western way is to like identify one person
Yes.
as the hero, and it was often the doctor. So even if me and a
Yes.
bunch of people were interviewed, it was my face that, and I felt so much anger at the beginning. It's hard to practice this balance. So
Absolutely.
I'm just giving an example. I'm trying to give an example, but it doesn't have to
Yeah.
be in research. But like, how do you reconcile, using a traditional approaches to well-being or bringing in community into your
Mhm.
practice, into your research, into your life,
Mhm.
versus colonial approaches to medicine and just being.
Mhm. Yeah, really important questions. Obviously, multiple dynamics in there. I think when I listen to your story and of my own approach, one of the things I think is first, and we want to talk, if it comes up a bit later, I can talk about the court inquest I was at today where I talked about this too, is the relationship is always the first outcome and it's the most important outcome. When we're talking about an individual healthcare encounter, we're talking about our relationships with community. The relationship is the primary thing to be protected, which requires us to be trustworthy, right? So if I say I'm not going to share some information without permission, I'm not going to share it without permission. If I say I'm going to take the time that it takes to build the relationships and to do good work, then it's going to take time. And absolutely, if you look across the stretch of time, this has impacted things like, for example, promotion and tenure applications for Black and Indigenous physicians in academic roles. It is a consequence that universities have variably tried to like amend, right? But again, I come back to that. Who do I work for? And I don't mean who pays my bills. I mean, what is my deepest why for engaging in the really, really difficult work that I do? And where is my highest form of accountability, right? I can sleep at night knowing it took me 16 years to apply for promotion as from assistant to associate professor. I can't sleep at night if I feel like I betrayed community relationships for the purpose of career self-advancement. So to me, that is primary. And even when I look back through the course of the pandemic, for example, lots of highs, lots of lows, 98% of the highs had to do with my relationships with community, interactions with knowledge keepers. I received my third name, an Anishinaabe name, from a very respected Anishinaabe elder during the pandemic, actually. And he told me he had a dream about my name at the vaccine ceremony that we had when we were vaccinating Indigenous elders. You know what I mean? That support and that love kept me going on a lot of really hard days and hard nights. And so I think the things that keep you going, we all need paychecks and we deserve absolutely to
Mhm.
get paid fairly for
Yes.
the extent of the work we do, including the emotional labor. And what keeps me going are those community relationships. So I need to invest in them and honor them.
Yes, no, I love it, and I want to zoom in on the pandemic and community in a moment. I
Mhm.
just want we're at 7:22. We go till 7:30. I'm using
Yeah.
ET, yeah, Eastern time. But if folks have questions, comments, please put it in. Like I'm seeing Helen, Condell, Del D Hines, Deontay. Put in your questions that you have for Dr. Anderson. This is the time. I'm not always
Mhm.
good at do like I have to scroll. I'm not good at multitasking with this. So put the questions in. If I don't answer, I'm gonna get to it. So please put in your questions or your comments. Um, One thing that also comes to mind because I'm thinking about like when I was a student, sometimes we are put in situations where we're jammed in a spot. You're doing research that you think is problematic. There are ways to kind of just ask questions and see if there's a different way to
Yes.
do it. Sometimes the team appreciates it. Sometimes
Yeah.
the team does not appreciate it. And I think there's
Oh,
times where you have to just keep your commitment and say, okay, I need to get through, just like you said, like sometimes you need to get paid. I think sometimes as a student you need to just get that A or whatever you need to move forward.
mhm.
But finding ways to either get help from somebody else or when you there's times in my life I had to put my advocacy in my back pocket about a particular issue. I
Yeah.
was just in a tight spot, but later I helped develop programs to like you
Yes.
know what I mean,
Yes.
prevent that.
Exactly.
So you can
Yeah.
still keep your values even if you're in a situation of a tight spot. Sometimes it's filing a complaint, sometimes it's looking for a mentor, but sometimes you will be jammed and it's okay. You can still keep your dedication to your community over time.
Mhm.
You have
Yes.
time.
I totally agree with that. And this is a conversation I have often with learners at different levels, from students to residents who are lower in the power structure, in the very hierarchical academic medicine power structure, right? I think curious questioning is a great tool to try to illuminate a blind spot when it comes to how racism or colonialism, other forms of bias are impacting a setting. Curious questions are great. Bringing in papers from different fields even, or smaller studies of here's what was possible there. What would it take for us to try it here? Great, great approach as well. But I did not confront every experience of racism I had directly as a medical student or as a
Yeah.
resident or even as a physician. You can't, you cannot do it. And also, you take on risk when you do it. And if you don't have the power that you need or the resources that you need to get to a positive outcome, that might not be your best choice. Maybe, like you said, you put it in your back pocket and you think about, how do I leverage this? How do I address this when I am in more of a position with access to more resources, influence, power to make a decision? That is so valid and so strategic. And when we think about the multiple generations it's going to take us to completely disrupt and dismantle racism and colonization in healthcare systems, like
Girl.
if it is 10 years, but it's more effective, like honestly, it's worth it.
It is,
Yeah, I think
it
there was
is
a
worth
couple
it.
questions too.
Oh,
Just going to draw
okay.
your attention to that.
Thank you. Because
Yeah,
like I get so caught up, I'm like listening and then I'm like, okay.
I know.
So let me see here. Oh yeah, see, thank you.
Yeah.
Um, okay, so Janelle is asking what motivated you to continue medicine despite underrepresentation and or racism? Do you ever feel burnout as a minority physician?
Great
Good
questions.
question.
Thank you, Janelle, for engaging. So I have such a deep sense of why and such strong internal motivation that leaving medicine has quite honestly never occurred to me. I will say though, when I talk to people who are considering it, that I always say, if you can see yourself making a difference in any other way and being happy, you should do that thing.
Hmm.
Because medicine is so hard, right? Do I ever feel burnout? Yeah, and in fact, I've been treated for it. I've been under the care of a psychiatrist in the past. I've taken medications for burnout and depression. I've done a lot of executive coaching, became an executive coach myself to understand more what boundaries I need to protect myself from burnout, and also what energizes me. What in this work gives me joy to help protect me from burnout. Part of it is connecting with people like you, Dr. O. Part of it has been the group coaching that I've been doing later. Some of the more creative aspects of work, starting to understand that not all anti-racism work is about conflict and tension and the inquest like the one I testified at it today. When we are supporting each other to thrive, to be joyful, to take rest, to be excellent, that too is anti-racism work, and it is
Yes.
deeply energizing anti-racism work.
Yes, absolutely. I love it. So yeah, I mean, and I've had burnout too. I'm like, I'm on a sabbatical. I do the things that bring me joy, right? So
Mhm.
absolutely. So, but same as you, like I can't see myself doing any other field than medicine. So that's where my
Mhm.
passion is, and that's where, same thing. But yes, if you can do something else that brings you joy, do that.
Do it.
Okay, so Deontay says, love what you're doing. Happy to see you overcome the issues and accomplish all that you have. And then Daldy Hines said, for folks who take advantage of new pathways for Indigenous or Black, like so the Indigenous or Black pathways,
Mhm.
any advice for those prospects? And then it continues to say, how should they prepare for comments like,
Yeah.
oh, you didn't earn your place here? So
Yeah.
do you want to?
Such great questions. Yeah. And so the first thing I would say, and we've talked about this a bit, is get connected enough in your why that you have that fortitude to withstand some of the challenges that we've already discussed. And that's really important. The second thing I would say is we got to understand what these pathways are. These pathways aren't, oh, look, us as Black and Indigenous people have all the same advantages in a level playing field with white applicants to medical school, and these pathways are putting us in an advantage to them. These pathways are like, oh, hey, we have had hundreds of years of impacts of colonization, anti-Indigenous racism, anti-Black racism that have accumulated in numerous barriers to us accessing medical education. These pathways try to help mitigate some of those barriers. And in reality, I have to be more qualified to get my spot here. And so I
Correct.
think always understanding that um, on average, when we look at population data, when you look at your own stories, our stories are heterogeneous. They're all different. We are all impacted by anti-Indigenous racism, anti-Black racism, and all that that means. The pathways help mitigate some of that. It's not about advantage. It's about trying to remove some of the disadvantage.
Absolutely. Yes, yes, yes.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's key. It's to really, I think, like you said, in your heart, know your why, your purpose, and that should be louder than any kind of imposter syndrome voice. Understand that and who you are,
Mm-hmm.
and like understand that like it's not that you didn't get in the fairway. The question is, did the person who's asking you that question get in the fairway? As in, like,
Absolutely.
was it an equal race to the finish line or to the outcome? No need to get
Mm-hmm.
into a debate with them. That's what you say to yourself in your mind. And you answer the question the way Marcia said.
Yeah, like
There's no
I
point of
earned my
getting into like
spot here,
period.
period. Like the end.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You don't have to be like me and be like, did you?
Did you experience the advantage that the MCAT confers on white people, for example?
That's
Did
it.
you confer, like, did you benefit from the advantage that other racially biased tools confer on white people? Like, we can flip the question around as a thought exercise.
Yes, as a thought exercise, right? I don't want to get emails because you got into a brawl at school. As a thought exercise. Okay, Gloria is asking. Okay, and we're past the time, but this kind of the questions tend to roll in
Mhm.
after time, so we're gonna go over
Yeah,
y'all.
I'm good with it.
Gloria has asked, how do you approach making a positive impact for your community, and what gave you the courage to step forward and address these barriers for not only yourself, yeah, but for others? Thank you so much. She
Hmm.
says. Thank you, Gloria. So yeah,
Yeah.
Marcia.
Yeah. Great question, Gloria. And so, in approaching this, the first, I will circle back to the importance of community relationships and how important being nested in different communities. And I would say that, we're all part of multiple different communities. There's no pan Indigenous community, just like there's no pan Black community, right? And so, investing in those kind of localized relationships, sometimes they're national communities too, to understand what would actually be beneficial and how to approach that is a big thing. I think, like I mentioned before, when you engage in those ways and around that core principle of reciprocity, my experience has been, and I'm confident my experience will continue to be, and when I do work in good ways with communities, I will also be served. And so that grounds a lot of the courage as well. The other piece that I will say is in Manitoba, where I work, when I joined faculty, there actually were already a couple of Indigenous physicians on faculty. And there were also some settler physicians who had been working for decades in Indigenous communities who knew that that work had to be taken over by Indigenous physicians. So I didn't have to go about starting the work to create the space, which is really, really hard work as the first or as the only, say you're an Indigenous faculty member, a Black faculty member, a Black physician, something like that. And so when I see myself as an actor in the continuum of time and the multi-generational work of this, I understand my scope of the work here,
Yes.
and I just trust people are coming up and will continue to come up who are going to pick up the work from me. It's not my job to solve everything or do everything. And when I rein it in that way in my brain, it helps me maintain my courage to act.
I love that. I think as we think about decolonizing medicine and decolonizing other spaces, right? Whatever spaces we're in, that piece of going back to community and finding your community, right? And that what you said about
Mm-hmm.
it not being like a homogeneous pan, you know what I mean? It doesn't mean that like
Mm-hmm.
all folks who fall under a particular category all get along and all have the same views. But there's that saying
Yeah,
that I think some
definitely not.
people, and it shouldn't. It's not like, why would all white people have the
Exactly.
same opinion? Why
It
should
wouldn't be
all black people?
expected of them.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
absurd. But I do like that saying, find your tribe, right? I think some people have a problem with the word tribe, but it be coming from, I'm Igbo tribe. We actually like the
Yes.
word tribe. So find your tribe, like find the people who, you know what I mean? Where you feel at home and hopefully have values that are in alignment with yours so that you can engage in different forms of advocacy, whatever that might be, right? It might
Mm-hmm.
be addressing
Mm-hmm.
patriarchy, colonizing, whatever, but have
Absolutely.
that purpose, right? To be part of change in community, not by yourself. Life is not a Netflix special. It's in community.
Absolutely. And I just like, I don't think I can reinforce that enough. For me personally, I find both my why and my foundation are in those community relationships. I don't know if your experience is the same. I have a hard time understanding people who are like the kind of lone wolf operators, right?
Yeah.
Full disclosure makes me a little bit suspicious. So it's not my place to judge who anyone's community is, but I fundamentally believe we all need to be in community and doing this work.
Yeah, I mean, we know that we are social beings. I mean, as we learned during the
Mhm.
pandemic. And that's another thing that I wanted to ask, because there's
Yes.
your own community and then working with other communities. And so, somebody had asked about the pathway programs, for instance, for Black and Indigenous faculty. And what we see, depending on the school or depending on the context, sometimes
Mhm.
we have Black faculty like Dr. Mireille Norris in internal medicine who's working with Black and Indigenous students. We have
Mhm.
you, Marcia, who's done so much work with Black
Mhm.
students and even helping advance the Black Medical Students Association of Canada, even working in collaboration
Mhm.
and solidarity. We talked earlier
Mhm.
this week about the Black Health Learning
Yeah.
Objectives. I'm just giving like small examples. There's so many, and
Yeah.
probably many I don't even know. But it's a
Mhm.
difficult space. It's a difficult space to work within community where there is heterogeneity and differences of
Yes.
opinion. And then there can be a tension and misunderstandings even
Mhm.
between communities. But I've seen you do it beautifully. So how do you
Oh, thank
navigate that
you.
space?
Yeah. So, I have this fundamental understanding that I have learned in partnership with Black friends and colleagues like yourself and Dr. Dryden and others around really the dual pillars of anti-Black racism and anti-Indigenous racism in the development of the Canadian state. And really thinking about what does that mean for me personally? What do the teachings around our liberation being tied up together mean, not just philosophically, but like pragmatically and practically. And then also being receptive to feedback. I'm sure you remember that after the tragic death of Mr. Floyd, I had reached out with ideas, and you had said to me, not the time, basically. Very gently, but yeah, no, might be a good idea. Now's not the time. I'm maxed out. We're maxed out. And I was like, okay, I'm going to take a step back and I'm going to follow the lead and I'm going to be ready to show up when and in the ways that I'm asked. And so
And you
that is
did, and you
kind
did.
of my model, yeah, for working in solidarity is I feel free enough to throw out an idea here and there, be receptive to feedback, but also listen for the invitations on the when and what would actually be helpful.
Yes, yeah. No, I
Mhm.
agree. And there's been times that, I mean, there was, even for me, we were doing work on within the public health and preventive medicine residency program,
Mhm.
and it was indigenizing spaces. And then Sarah Funnell and others said, well, there's no elders involved in that. Like, we had consulted an elder, but it wasn't indigenous led. So she was like, can you take a
Mhm.
step back and let's decolonize before you're thinking about indigenize? And I was like, whoops. Okay, sorry. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, it's
Yeah.
having that humility to be like, okay, take a step back. And that's what we did. So I'm learning, you're learning,
Mhm.
and I'm leaving space
And
for questions. But yes,
we
go
are
ahead.
holding space for each other to learn and be imperfect, right?
Yes,
It wasn't
yes.
the end of our relationship. It was like, this is not the way, but let's stay in contact. Let's keep connecting. Let's think about, we have Indigenous health examinable objectives in the MCC. How does that help support the development of Black health objectives, and how do we bounce off our knowledge of working with this organization together as one example, right? Like when we have grace for each other's imperfections and learning journeys too, we can be accountable and receptive to feedback and then still be showing up in that relationship.
Absolutely. And again, I'm opening it up for any more questions or comments. I have
Mm-hmm.
one more question for you myself, and then if there aren't any other comments, we'll wrap up. But I'm
Sounds great.
like, this is the time, y'all. We're talking. This is Dr. Anderson is Vice-Dean of Anti-Racism. Okay, Indigenous Health, Anti-Racism, Social Justice. Like, Brilliant. This is the moment. Um, but
And can I just say quickly hi to my friends who have joined? I do
oh
see you.
yes, good, good, good. I love it because we're talking about community, right? Community
Yeah.
has shown up, so welcome and thank you. Um, so I wanted to give a little bit of time and space, but I think now is a good time. We're talking
Hmm.
about liberation. You just are
Hmm.
coming out of an inquest. That's why
Yeah.
you're in your car. I didn't want to dive
Yeah.
right in when you're right,
Yeah. That's
but you're
okay.
coming from an inquest, and I think a lot of folks might not even know that physicians do this and what's involved in an
Hmm.
inquest. And how you are processing all of that, right? Again, I appreciate you coming on right after an inquest. So can you speak to that a little bit or to whatever extent you want to?
Yeah. Yeah. And of course, the inquest becomes public record. So whenever that report is released, if people are interested, they, I'm sure, can find it on Google. Um, what I would say around that is I have worked so incredibly hard to be able to be seen as a credible medical expert, both in my where my training is, internal medicine and public health, and also my training in anti-racism and Indigenous health and the impacts of colonization. I mostly try not to get involved in inquests because it's really triggering. There's a lot
Yeah.
of emotional labor when you're reading through all the disclosure files, perhaps seeing pictures
Well,
or videos. It's
do you want
it's a
to kind of
really
give folks an idea of what an inquest is and how they ask a physician to do it?
sure. Yeah. So an inquest is a court proceeding, usually because of a death that happened in an unfortunate circumstance. This one happened to be a death in custody that occurred after multiple and repetitive contacts with the healthcare system. So with a question of was this death preventable and what was the potential roles of anti-Indigenous racism in it. So there is like the inquest counsel as well as lawyers for every represented party, which can include different members of the healthcare system, so different healthcare organizations, paramedics, as well as in this case, in counsel for the family of the person who was deceased. It's like reviewing hundreds of papers of documentation. I provided an affidavit, so a written expert report of my analysis first, and then today I testified for about 8 hours in a court proceeding about some of the medical details of the case and the potential ways that anti-Indigenous bias showed up. And those questions included everything from like details of documentations and the dose of radiation from CTs, which I said I do not have the expertise to fully speak on, to whether the in plain sight report from BC should be considered credible given what has since come to light with the false Indigenous ancestry claims of Mary Ellen to Pelafon. Like that is the breadth of things that as an Indigenous physician you might get asked about in an inquest report. So it brings up so many feelings, emotions. My sleep was disrupted. Fortunately, like I could took a couple breaks on lunch. I went for a walk to do some self-care. I held an eagle feather the whole time. I had a small part of my bundle available to me in my vehicle, and I debriefed with a friend who is an Indigenous lawyer involved with the inquest after. So try to like do these aspects of self-care around it, acknowledging how difficult it is, but also recognizing that these are important ways to shine lights on the impacts of anti-Indigenous racism in healthcare and opportunities for change.
I'm so glad that you're willing to share that. And, like
Mhm.
I said, so just so folks know, we talked about this before because I didn't know if it was going to be raw for Dr. Anderson to talk about because 8 hours today and then the trauma and
Mhm.
all of that. And like with my podcast and this, I'm very big on not engaging in trauma voyeurism, like tell us about
Yeah.
your pain. But Dr. Anderson felt comfortable,
Yes.
sharing
Yeah.
and had debriefed, right? As she said, processed. That's so important in these situations. If you're going to a meeting, or you're going to talk about racism you experience, planning ahead of time as much as possible to be able to talk with someone after, or even
Mhm.
laugh or make fun of, I don't know, the
Yes.
people in the room, whatever you need to do to process. But being intentional about that is important for healing. But also knowing your limits. Like for me, I did an inquest last year on anti-Black racism. I
Mhm.
found it very traumatic, not because it's not like on TV with court, like in inquest, you're trying to they're trying to look at a better approach and not about blame or put
Yes.
someone in jail. So you're not
Yeah.
being like rattled by a lawyer who's trying to discredit you. So that's not what was traumatizing for me, but it was learning about the experience of this person
Mm-hmm.
and their last few hours of life. See, I'm
Mm-hmm.
getting like, oof. So
Yeah.
for me at this point, I'm not doing any more inquests. That's what I'm trying to tell all of you. Like, as much as I
Yeah.
do anti-racism work, I'm saying that for all of us at different points in our journey, you have to decide what you can do and cannot do and leave it for others, or leave it for later. Like maybe when I'm more advanced
Mm-hmm.
in my career or therapy, I can go back to inquests, but right now I cannot. Right? So everybody
I
is
think
different.
that, yeah, I think we just have to really pace ourselves and trust ourselves. There is so much anti-racism work to do that not all of it can be mine, not all of it can be yours, and we can't be in every arena all of the time. And I think one of the best ways that we can support each other is to support and trust that each of us is making an informed and the best decision possible for the work we're engaged in at the time we're engaged in it.
Yes. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And with that, we're going to close, but I don't want to close only with that. I want to
Mm-hmm.
ask about, I mean, you debriefed, but what other things do you think you'll be doing, or do you sometimes do to have ease and
Yeah.
joy and rest after something like this? Because it's so important
Yeah.
for us to like, this stuff is put on us. It's a label, but it's not
Mm-hmm.
ours. We have to just let it go at
Yeah.
times on our own time. So, what do you do for ease,
Totally.
joy,
This
rest?
is such a good question. And I think, for me, the way I understand it is dehumanizing work. Right? Reading through that stuff, the way that it triggers my own memories and experiences, it is dehumanizing. And so when I think about prep work as well as recovery work, I think, what does it take for me to rehumanize myself, right? And the debriefing was one. We talked about far more than the law case, right? We connected as Indigenous women. I'm connecting with you right now. I would have said no to 99% of the people who asked me to do this, right?
Thank you.
Quite honestly, right? I knew we would have a good conversation. It would be energizing and I would feel affirmed and validated. I will probably get some light exercise in within the kind of physical capacity I have right now. I will probably have a nice hot soak in the tub. I have a friend who makes like Epsom salts. Actually, Max, my kid, made me Epsom salts with essential oils. But I
Aw.
also have a friend who infuses bath bombs with indigenous medicines. Will smudge, like using medicines and traditions too. Like these are all things that help me reconnect to all the domains of my fully human self.
Oh, I love that.
Mhm.
That's beautiful. And Deldy Hines has said, so this is a nice way to conclude. Thanks, Dr. Anderson, for sharing. Please do take good care.
Thank you.
And thanks, Anya, for checking in before asking Dr. Anderson to unpack that experience. Yes, absolutely.
Great example.
So yeah, so I think we'll conclude. Is there a way that people can follow, like where can people follow you on Instagram or Twitter, or get in touch with you? I couldn't find you on
Yeah,
LinkedIn. I don't know. So how can
Instagram
people?
is definitely the
Okay.
best. So, to be honest, I'm not even sure which Instagram account I ended up joining with. I do have two. One is more personal. That's the at Marcia
That's the
J.
one.
Anderson one. And then I also have one that's on coaching and leadership, really focused on anti-racism and Indigenous health and coaching. And that's my at the Leaders Lodge
That,
account. So
that's what you
Instagram
joined
is the
with.
best place to. Oh, it is.
Yeah,
Hey, I
yeah.
kind of suspected so. So either account there, but for the coaching and leadership stuff, definitely the Leaders Lodge one.
Leaders Lounge. I love it. Okay, so we stayed a little bit over. We had really great questions. Thank you all for tuning in. Thank you, Dr.
Mm-hmm.
Anderson. People are sending fire and love. Yes, that
Yes,
is,
thank you, everybody.
that's it. All right. Thank you. Have a good night.
Okay, take care.
Bye.
I didn't know how to join and I don't know how to
It's
leave.
okay.
So,
I got you. I got you.
thank you.